Welcome to the Home Business Podcast with Richard Captain Henderson, publisher of Home Business Magazine, and Sherilyn Colleen, managing editor. This how-to show helps you successfully operate your home-based business.
Greetings and welcome to the Home Business Podcast. I'm Richard Captain Henderson, your skipper at Home Business TV.
And I'm Sherilyn Colleen, your co-host.
Let's secure for CN get underway. Home business owners have to reach people through marketing whose reality is shaped by social class, gender identity, culture, and lifestyle choices.
Many of these categories are no longer relevant as people access a variety of experiences that cross traditional home business boundaries.
So how can home business marketers understand these new consumers? By tearing down the walls that they have built to describe these customers.
And the perfect person to provide the sledgehammer, Dr. Michael Solomon, who joins us today. Dr. Solomon is author of Marketers Tear Down These Walls, Liberating the Postmodern Consumer.
So, greetings, Dr. Michael Solomon. Welcome to the Home Business Podcast. Say hello to our podcast audience.
Hello, thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming on our show.
So I understand you're a Philadelphia Eagles fan.
Well, when you live in Philadelphia, you have no choice.
That's my next course. You're dialing in from Philadelphia, so thanks for connecting today.
Yeah. So Dr. Solomon, a key marketing theme you hit is market segmentation and how this has given way to lifestyle marketing. What do home business owners need to understand about lifestyle marketing?
Well, for many years, we've taught people in marketing about the fundamentals of segmentation. And in other words, you put people into boxes based on gender, ethnicity, income, where they live, etc. And those boundaries or those walls really don't make that much sense anymore because people don't like to be put into little boxes, and your customers don't like to be put into little boxes. So certainly segmentation has its uses, but what tends to happen is that we assume that once we put everybody into a box, say they're a female in their 20s who lives in the Northeast, etc., we tend to treat everybody in that box as if they were identical. And yet we know that when we get put in those boxes, we say, well, hey, I'm not exactly the same as everybody else, who shares my gender, my age, etc. So what we find is that, especially today, because people have so many different experiences and products available to them, literally at the click of a mouse, people want to experience other things. They want to get out of those boxes. And they're very receptive to businesses that treat them as if they are individuals. So it's not literally possible to treat every one of your customers as a total individual unless you have only one or two customers. Hopefully you have more. But you can customize the experience and don't assume that you know everything there is to know about a person just because you've captured, say, their demographics. So lifestyle marketing is really all about taking that next step, starting maybe with some broad segmentation variables, but then really diving in and trying to get to know your customer as a person. And often that involves something very simple but very complicated at the same time. And that's actually talking to your customers, finding some of your best customers, for example, and going to, so to speak, going to live with them. Now, you don't have to move into their house necessarily, but you need to really understand who they are and what makes them tick. Because one of the things that I found over the years working with a lot of big companies is that managers assume they know who their customers are, but you know what? Often their assumptions are based on their projection of what they want their customers to be rather than who they really are.
So, yeah, I took a look at this. I was a little bit confused at it at first when you talked about, segmentation and how it changes. But I think I'm grasping it where if you home in and become overly focused on segmentation, then that gets in the way or conflicts with getting to know your customers more from their lifestyles and as individuals.
Right. And, as I talk about in the book quite a bit, we've really become chameleons today. We're changing colors. We're changing the things that we do, the foods we like, et cetera, sometimes many times a day. And we live in a culture that gives us the opportunity to do that. So for marketers, it's both a blessing and a curse. You know, it's a blessing because people have the ability to experience and to purchase so many more things than they used to. But it's a curse for the same reason, because they're never going to stay in one place. So back in the 1950s or 1960s, we could pretty much count on everybody fitting into a few small boxes. You know, we could reach almost everybody in the United States, for example, on network television, and there were only 3 or 4 stations at the time. Today we have thousands of stations and, of course, thousands and thousands of websites. So people are constantly moving, and if you think you know them just because you've given them a label, that is a very big mistake.
So maybe another way of looking at this is, you know, with traditional marketing, before you had all these different channels, segmentation was more important. But now that you can reach your customers through so many different channels, on both online, offline, everywhere, that makes it even more important to know them as individuals and get away from just, you know, labeling everyone in a broad segment.
Right. You need to know them as individuals. And also, you know, one of the big categories I talk about that is disintegrating is the distinction between the producer of a product and the consumer of a product. So what's happening now is that your customers, in many cases, have become what we call the co-creators of your product or service. In other words, they're playing more of a role in helping companies design the products that they sell and how to advertise those products. So the consumer literally can become part of your company in the sense that you should be getting their input from a very, very early stage and not just putting something out there without getting that feedback. It's a constant feedback loop, and that means that you should be adjusting what you do literally every day based on what your customers are telling you.
Yeah, I've experienced that in the publishing world, that feedback loop, because digital marketing and how you reach, you know, going from traditional display advertisements to providing a whole portfolio of digital marketing. It's not just putting it out there. You've got to get that feedback, but also that feedback to make sure they understand what you're doing. They know what you're doing for you. Just, you know, a lot of times they can't measure things, but if they can see what you're doing, that can have benefit too, and you know, to keep that feedback loop. But well, moving on here, you also talk about how traditional categories that we marketers use to think about our customers are obsolete. Dr. Sullivan, what does this mean for home business and small business marketers today?
Well, again, as we were talking about with regard to segmentation, we can't assume that once we put people into a little box, we understand them. And so it's especially important for someone in a small business who may not have the resources, you know, to have a huge marketing research department or to commission a marketing research study, to get as much information as they can about people. And fortunately, we have ways to do this. You know, one way, as I mentioned earlier, is very, very simple, and that is to literally get out and, so to speak, fish where the fish are. In other words, try to make the effort to go to places where you think your customers are hanging out and just engage them. Now, you're not going to get a representative sample, perhaps, but don't just sit at home and think, well, I know who they are because I read a description of them, or I know that they're, you know, women in their 20s and so on. But also use the basic tools that you're doing. I mean, if you have a home business, you're, you know, 99% likely that you're online quite a bit. And of course, the internet gives us an amazing way to understand our customers by reaching out to them, by tracking various websites, what we call brand communities. That's a very, very important thing. And
I imagine this ties in a lot with social media, segmenting, finding out where these brand communities are within different social media channels.
Exactly. And, you know, what we find, a lot of managers are surprised, you know, when I say to them, you know, there are websites out there that are devoted to your brand and your company has nothing whatsoever to do with them. People are going on all the time and talking about your products. You need to be a part of that conversation. So whether you're a huge business or a solopreneur, you're going to find that people love to talk about what you're doing. Now, the problem is that they'd rather talk about the bad things you're doing than the good things you're doing.
That's for sure.
So we know that people are much more likely to spread negative information than positive information. But that's yet another reason why it's so important to stay on top of conversations that are going on online, because you need to nip those in the bud. And so, for example, it's becoming more commonplace now for companies to monitor the Twitter feeds about their companies. Like, for example, Delta Airlines, not exactly a home business, but they've been very proactive about making sure that as soon as somebody starts to tweet negative things, I'm stuck at the airport, they canceled my flight, they've got people who are assigned to reach out to that person and nip it in the bud. So to the extent that you can do that, a lot of research has shown that when people are dissatisfied with a product, but then the company actually contacts them and apologizes and tries to make good on it, they actually become a customer for life. So you can do that whether you're a big business or a small one.
Good point. Well, before moving on to our next topic, I'd like to highlight this show's sponsor, City America. City America will help you manage your own city directory website, keep 100% of income. City America provides ongoing support and training, only one site per city. So contact City America today to see what is available. For more information, call 800-856-9870 or visit cityamerica.com, our podcast website, for more information on sponsors.
Now, every marketing discussion in home business hones in on millennials, the young and the restless. How do we capture the hearts, minds, and wallets of millennials?
Well, millennials, of course, are a different breed, and their younger brothers and sisters that we're calling Gen Z or iGen or lots of names like that. I see these characters all day long in my classes, and holding the attention of 18-year-olds for an hour or two is not easy. It's not easy for companies either. But what's very interesting about these younger consumers is that they're actually, for the most part, fairly positive about brands. They're very interested in brands. They're very involved, obviously, in social media, to say the least. And they value certain traits or characteristics of companies that set them apart a bit from their older brothers and sisters. The primary thing that I think they value is what we can broadly call authenticity. So they want to know that a company is giving back to the community. They want to know what you're doing to engage with the broader community. It's not just a transactional kind of thing. They're happy to buy stuff from you. They've got tons of disposable income, but you've got to put some proof on the table that you're not just talking the talk, you're actually walking the walk. So, one thing I tell business owners all the time is, especially if you've got a backstory, let's say your company has an interesting story about how it got founded. It was two sisters who decided that they didn't like the soap they found in the grocery store, so they started making soap and selling it, or something like that. Millennials and Gen Z love to hear stories like that. So don't hide that under a bushel. Even if it's just you and one other person running the business, people love to hear those kinds of stories. So if you've got a backstory, talk about it, and talk about it often.
So a couple key points there. You want to show that you're doing more than just making money off the customer. What are you doing to make things better, and then also share that story. So good point. Well, Dr. Sullivan, you have an interesting perspective on online and offline marketing differences. Why are offline versus online marketing strategies obsolete?
Well, for many years we've made a distinction. We've put people in behind these walls. You're either online or you're offline. And of course, today, no matter what age you are, you're spending a lot of time online. The difference is that for those of us who are a bit older, it's a conscious kind of movement where you say, okay, I'm going to go online now, or I'm going to go offline now. Well, for younger people, I think that distinction is no longer relevant, where they don't really think about going online and offline. It's much more of a seamless transition. And most people today are literally online and offline at the same time. So certainly my students sitting in class are offline to some extent, but many of them are online as well, staring at their Facebook posts and so on while they're listening to me or pretending to.
How do you stop them from doing that? Do you just say, put those smartphones away, or you just got to live it?
You're either on the train or under it. Many of my colleagues and I have, we banned cell phones and laptops for years. But what we try to do now, and this leads to my answer to your question, is not to fight this tidal wave, but rather to surf this wave. In other words, come up with things for them to do that while they're online that are not taking attention away from what you're doing offline. And so to get back to your question in terms of marketing strategy, it's no longer, the question is no longer how much of my activity do I allocate to offline versus online. What we're heading toward is much more of a hybrid experience. And this is really true for retailers in particular. Even when people are going to physical stores, and we know that there's been some decline in that, they are still going because they want to be stimulated, entertained, and educated. And one way you can do that is not by shunning this online technology, but rather embracing it. So using technologies, for example, in small stores where you might have a kiosk or something like that. You might have even something more sophisticated like augmented reality or even virtual reality in some cases. But the idea is that, so for example, some retailers are starting to look at so-called smart mirrors. If you've ever seen any of these, they're quite amazing. The customer stands, looks at herself in the mirror, but superimposed over that, she can, for example, virtually try on different blouses or jeans and things like that. And so there you have that physical in-store experience that's been complemented by a technical experience. So nowadays, to say my customer is primarily offline or I primarily deal with online customers, I think is a big waste of time.
So touching more on that, Dr. Solomon, how will cutting-edge technologies like virtual reality revolutionize the shopping experience?
Well, we're already seeing quite a bit of that. Now, we're hearing most of the buzz about virtual reality. And unless you're a really big player, quite honestly, I don't think that is a strategy quite yet. If we talk 10 years from now, I'll have a different answer. But to me, the real promise is not VR, virtual reality, but rather AR, augmented reality. And for those of your viewers who don't know what that is, if you're familiar with the game Pokemon Go, that was a big deal a couple of years ago, that's a great example of augmented reality. So what it means is you're taking that physical reality, but you're adding a layer to it. You're adding a digital layer. So for example, even a small store can have an AR application where you might have some kind of app on your smartphone where you hold it up in front of, let's say, a store window, and superimposed on whatever you see in the window, there's going to be information about the product. There's going to be information about sales that are going on. Maybe there's some kind of co-branding opportunities with other stores in the neighborhood. And so those are the things that are really going to get people excited. And of course, there's other technologies like beacons, for example, that when you're walking around in the store, that will communicate directly with your smartphone and help you navigate the store. Again, those are probably a little pricey for a really small business. But even some kind of online presence, whether you sell primarily, again, to people online or offline, doing more on your website, making it more interesting, using principles of gamification, if you know that term, where basically we're taking some of the elements that make people want to play games all day long and transferring those to websites.
But I guess there's also some other things to do, even on a less sophisticated level. It's pretty routine now to integrate chat into your website where you're talking to them immediately there. They have those Animan features that you can put on to speak to them. And I guess so it kind of comes down to how can you create some two-way feedback as they go through the shopping experience.
Right. And even to the point, we were talking before about crowdsourcing, even to the point where you give over your store or your website to your customers for certain periods of time. So you kind of give the keys to the asylum to the inmates, and let them actually, for example, it would be like somebody guest hosting a radio show or guest hosting your show.
Maybe we should do that.
I'm not angling for the job, by the way.
You want to take over?
No, that's okay. You guys know what you're doing. But doing playful things like that, having very spontaneous things, and remember, the perfect is the enemy of the good. I think it's okay to fail. It's okay to try things, and not everything is going to work out great. But what people value today, again, is authenticity, originality. They want to know that you're not just some talking head who's representing a big corporation. Mm-hmm. And so take a few risks with it. And I think you'll get some followers who appreciate that perspective.
Well, this kind of ties into our next subject matter. No matter how advanced the technology, don't forget about that human aspect of your customer. So, Dr. Solomon, what can businesses, even the smaller ones, do to ramp up their customer engagement? So we hit a few of those points with your website and keep abreast of technologies that are coming online. Right. Any other ideas that a smaller business can do to increase that customer engagement?
Well, again, this idea of gamification is really, really powerful. And, it's kind of gotten distilled. For those people who know what it is, usually they equate it with getting badges if you accomplish certain tasks, or even frequent flyer miles on airlines. That's an example of gamification. But you can do other things that are more interesting. And even if you're a small business, you can do these things basically by using turning work into play. That's one of the other categories I talk about in the book that's disappearing. People are playing while they're working and working while they're playing. So rather than just having a very strict and formal shopping experience, transactional experience, you can create things, again, either online or offline, like old-fashioned stuff, sweepstakes, various kinds of puzzles that people have to solve.
What about surveys? Can walking people through surveys, can that be kind of considered gamification?
Only if you reward them frequently for taking the survey. The problem with surveys is, in my opinion, we have a lot of controversies today about sharing my data with you as the merchant. And I'm okay to share my data as long as, there's a recognition that I'm giving you something of value, because you're learning about me and people like me. I need some value in exchange. So again, if you want to gamify that survey process or make it more open-ended, like I was saying earlier, rather than having people answer specific questions, say, hey, just write to me and tell me, if you were running my company for a day, what changes would you make? And I'm gonna give a prize to the best answers I get, or something like that, where it's not so survey-y, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. But you're getting a lot of that feedback. I think you're going to find that people are a lot more enthusiastic about it if it's not put in the format of, hey, we want to squeeze some information out of you and take 10 minutes of your time. Well, 10 minutes of my time is 10 minutes I don't have to do something else. I'm not going to live forever, so why should I give you 10 minutes of my time? True. So by gamifying things, by I think injecting a playful element into it, and basically by involving other people, bringing your friends on, people that you've worked with, basically showing the customer that there's a lot of different faces behind the scenes. They really appreciate that kind of team feeling.
And you're building that two-way feedback. In other words, just instead of being on the phone with them and say talking two-way, you're doing it through this new concept of gamification, which, I think we should probably have a podcast sometime in the future just to talk about gamification, because that sounds like a fascinating concept with a lot of different directions that can go in.
It is. And, I've done programs just on gamification. Again, there's really simple stuff like frequent flyer miles, but there's many, many different applications. But the basic idea is reward people for doing small things rather than giving them a big reward at the end. So for example, in my kind of business, which is education, rather than just giving a final exam at the end of the term, I might give a quiz every week where I reward students. And in the same way, your customers know where they stand. And by the way, often injecting an element of competition into it. People love to compete, especially if there are valuable prizes at the end, right? So you can pit your customers against each other in a friendly way. And that also is something that really ramps up engagement.
Yeah, I can't think of a home-based business out there that couldn't do this. You know, maybe on a smaller scale, but you can take just about any smaller business application and gamify it and get your online communities interacting and doing some playful competition with it.
Absolutely. So, for example, you can get people to suggest solutions to your problems, throw those all up on a Facebook page, and have people vote for the best solution. So again, you're involving your customers at two levels. One, you're asking them to help you solve a problem, and second, you're rewarding those who do the best job of solving that problem. So there's lots of variations on that theme. And again, you don't have to be Procter & Gamble to do that kind of thing.
Dr. Michael Solomon, this has been a great discussion on breaking down those old marketing walls. Do you have any final points you would like to share with our audience?
Well, I'd say, again, the book I wrote is all about how these walls are so important to us, yet are so obsolete. One of the biggest walls that's coming down is the barrier between small business and large business. So as many of your listeners know, by using virtual assistants and sophisticated website tools and so on, it's really exciting that a solopreneur can actually kind of masquerade as a large corporation to some extent. And I do that myself because I'm an individual, And so I think there's a lot of interesting opportunities out there for people who run small or home-based businesses, but they need to recognize that just as they have changed, that is the way they're doing business has changed radically from 10 years ago, their customers have changed as well. So don't assume that you know your customer because you knew them 10 years ago. They are not the same people today.
Well, Dr. Michael Solomon, thank you for being such a great guest on the Home Business Podcast.
Thank you. It's a lot of fun.
To learn more about Dr. Michael Solomon and his new book, Marketers, Tear Down These Walls, visit michaelsolomon.com, our podcast website, for more information on guests.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Home Business Podcast. Share your feedback with us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and at our website, homebusinessmag.com.
Visit the website for information on advertising. Subscribe free to our newsletter. Please visit our sponsors. For more information, visit homebusinessmag.com or the Home Business Expo at homebusinessexpo.com.
I'm Richard Captain Henderson saying anchors away.
And I'm Sherilyn Colleen. We'll talk with you soon. Until then,
make it a great home-based biz day.